Welcome to episode 108 of the Lowdown Radio Show, presented by advrider.com. I'm Neil Graham. This week, Michael Uhlarik pedals his fixed-gear bicycle onto the show to talk about the most unhip motorcycle this side of the Bajaj Pulsar. Yes, the Suzuki V-Strom. But did you know that it's the best motorcycle in the history of everything? And if you don't believe me, ask any V-Strom owner, because they'll be happy to tell you at great length why this is so. Joking aside, actually, I'm not joking. The V-Strom is a totally unextreme motorcycle that will win no awards, nor will it brighten the corner of your garage on a cold winter night. And it's a big but, and actually, it has a big but. What I'm getting at is this. The V-Strom is not a machine to feed your fantasies of conquering the Erzberg rodeo like a KTM, nor will it feed your desire to escape your claustrophobic life for a dash down to Belize like you would on a BMW GS Adventure, where you'll shack up with an Australian surfer who, regrettably, you'll impregnate. And want to be a hoot to tell your kids back home about their new stepmom? Well, of course they'll hit it off. They're the same age. Nothing like this would ever happen to the owner of a V-Strom, however, because they're just happy that anybody loves them, even if things at home aren't quite what they used to be. All this, more or less, on this week's Lowdown Radio Show. Michael, if I'm somewhere off of my motorcycle and I see another motorcyclist coming along. Now, I don't know what kind of bike he's ridden. I just see a helmet in his hand. And if it's like an HJC helmet, and if he's wearing white running shoes, jeans that he's had since high school, and he's not a young man, and say like a Joe Rocket kind of mid-range or sub-mid-range riding jacket, there's a good chance that he rode there on a V-Strom. What is it about V-Stroms that attract this kind of buyer?
I think the short answer is they're fantastic general purpose motorcycles for the everyman, every woman.
And this is the everyman.
This is definitely the everyman. It is the jack of all trades and high degree of competence in most motorcycle. And I think I could surprise a lot of people by saying that if there was a need for me to ride a motorcycle right now from Halifax, Nova Scotia to the other side of the continent in any weather, I'd probably choose a V-Strom, sincerely, just because I'm so impressed. I've been so impressed by the various generations that I've tested, how incredibly good they are at just about everything.
This is what confuses me about the V-Strom, is that it has this cult following. But why does it have a cult following? Because it's kind of a bland motorcycle, and it actually kind of wears its blandness with pride. So what is it about this bike that makes it so memorable? Is there anything about it that you go to when you think of a V-Strom?
Yeah, I would say, the unique quality of the V-Strom is the motor. At a time, the late 90s when the V-Strom project kind of kicked off, all Japanese motorcycles were singles and across the frame parallel force that provided that butter smooth turbine-like power delivery. And the Japanese brands, all four of them, were able to manufacture them so well and so efficiently that they could offer them even at modest prices. Think your Bandits and your Hornets and bikes like that in every category. And they all have the same kind of characteristic. The V-Strom is a V-twin, a narrow 90-degree liquid-cooled V-twin. And so it has a completely different sound, completely different power delivery. And the narrowness of it means that, where a lot of 1,000cc adventure bikes, I mean, today it's a different story, but remember, the V-Strom's been in production for over 22 years. That's like 20% of the life of the motorcycle as an invention. We've lived with a V-Strom of some kind.
They do feel like they've been around forever, those V-Stroms. And they
do, and they last forever because they're overbuilt in the Suzuki, tradition. Incredibly reliable. And then you get this throaty, quite powerful, very torquey V-twin, which is really delightful in the way that all V-twins of a certain kind are. And, it it bears to be, you know, highlighted here that the origin of the V-Strom's motor was in the superbike, the TL 1000, which was designed as a direct competitor to Ducati and the Honda RC51. So, the beating heart of a V-Strom has this character because it wasn't designed as an adventure bike power plant. It was a sort of afterthought. And the V twin has many qualities. Some of them are good, some of them are problematic. Like it takes up a lot of space and it can be a packaging problem for engineering. But Suzuki made a very elegant, low cost solution in the way they oriented the suspension and the other components. So you end up with something that is a bit of an anachronism in the modern motorcycle, the 21st century motorcycle. It has a big fuel tank. It has a long range, but it doesn't feel big and bulky the way a GS does or a Yamaha Super Tenere does. So it kind of does everything really well, very efficiently, and then leaves behind this little calling card, which is this, from stock, really delightful power delivery, really nice sound. And really, isn't that why we like motorcycles?
Well, twins, V twins and V4s, I think, are the two engines. If you had to sacrifice every other motorcycle engine, I would let them all go except for V twins and V4s. And the thing that amazes me about that engine, and it is a fabulous engine. I know that whenever I show up at track day and there's a beat to shit SV650, which is the same engine, and there's a local guy, and that's his track, and it's the only track he ever goes to, and his bike's beat to shit, and he's got tape on his leathers. You're going to have a hard time getting past him, no matter what you're riding. And I remember being on an R1 and chasing a guy at a little racetrack, and it was a lot of work, and including a couple of dodgy moments to get past a guy on a 70 horsepower SV650
Low-cost motorcycle.
Yeah, and I had twice as much power, not twice as much skill, mind you, but twice the power. So they really are a fabulous engine. And while we're on this topic of that engine, I think it's interesting that it kind of stems from this peculiarity of the Euro favor that certain European manufacturers would get, like Ducati, because in World Superbike rules at that time, you had to run a 750cc four-cylinder engine versus 1,000cc that V-twins could run, which was essentially the Ducati rule. And then Honda with the RC51 and Suzuki with the TL 1000 thought, well, we'll just build the same kind of engine and then we can run a liter too. So that's kind of the backstory of that bike. So it's kind of, here's my question to you. Would this engine, is it inadvertently characterful? Like if Suzuki, here's a sort of a hypothetical. Had Suzuki started out to design an engine for that bike, knowing that it was just for a bike like that, I have a feeling that they wouldn't have made as good a job as they did by taking this other bike and kind of detuning it. I know that's a complicated question, but do you understand what I mean?
I do, and I concur. So Suzuki is a big company. Let's not forget it's an automobile manufacturer. It's a global automobile manufacturer. Although the numbers are not as impressive as, say, General Motors in terms of car volumes, Suzuki operates in every market on Earth. Certainly every major market on Earth, whereas someone like General Motors no longer do. So they have enormous technical depth. They have enormous pool of engineering and even financial resources. So your point being, why this motor for that application? Let's go back to like 1997 when the TL 1000 comes out. You're 100% right. That motor was designed with one thing in mind, that is to beat Ducati on the racetrack. And, that it didn't for a whole bunch of reasons. And they only campaigned it once and one season. And then they had invested all this money into this. And it is a spectacular piece of engineering, that motor.
And Suzuki is not one to wantonly throw money around. So come hell or high water, they were going to use it for they were going to run a sump pump or anything with it, weren't they?
Yeah, a diesel, electrical generator. But so I suspect you're right. If even in 1999, 2000, when that project kicked off, the original V-Strom, the target wasn't the GS. The GS adventure market, as we know it now, was growing with the second generation GS, the first one with the double beak. Um, but their target was more like the Yamaha TDM, which, they had 17-inch cast alloy wheels with street tires. These were tall, long travel suspension street bikes. They were really like think of it as a very, very road biased, mature dual sport. And the TDM had a parallel twin. And, the TDM, its competitors were things like a Honda CB 750F, which was only available in Europe, and it was a four-cylinder. So the Japanese were sticking to what they knew, and I suspect that Suzuki would have absolutely put a parallel four in there from the Bandit. Their venerable air oil cooled
Right.
motors,
Yeah. Of
which
course. Yeah.
sound great, are great. They're compact. They're powerful. They look good, but they had this surplus V twin, and the virtue of it in this application was the narrow package, and the fact that it opened up this giant cavity directly beneath the fuel tank just around the time that emission controls started getting stricter. The EU3 was around at that time around the corner. So airbox had to get bigger. Air restriction had to increase. Exhausts started to have catalysts. So having all this volume made the bike more amenable to a touring application with a tall tank. And then being able to put a relatively low seat height as well. So you marry these things that seem really, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, unsexy. Like, who thinks about their bike in terms of, seat height or fuel capacity? But these things matter, and they matter to the regular motorcyclist, not the hardcore guy who's willing to sacrifice comfort or sacrifice range. Like, oh, fine, I'll stop more frequently, because they care so much about brand or image projection or, loyalty to an idea or, even to their own self-image. I am ready to race, therefore I ride a KTM, for instance. The Suzuki is like designed for real people to do this task. And what's interesting about the two things I would highlight about the V-Strom. One is it's been in production, still is, 23 years later, which is remarkable.
With the parallel twin.
No, but the 1000, the 1100 cc is the V twin. That
Oh,
same
yes. I'm
motor.
sorry. You're right. The large one continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing is a number of spawn that came off of that motor. That motor, first of all, the entire V-Strom was white labeled as a Kawasaki KL1000 in Europe. A lot of people don't know that. So for a while, for I think 2 seasons, two commercial years, you could get a V-Strom 1000 as a Suzuki, or you could get what they called the Versus 1000 as a Kawasaki, and it was just a straight up Suzuki painted green. Then that motor was sold to Kajiva Group, which put the 1000cc and the 650 in the Raptor.
Raptor, yeah.
And the V Raptor, which was a really batshit crazy motorcycle. They down-tuned and significantly downgraded a version of the 650, which got licensed to Hyosung in Korea. Who else ran that? The 650, the Laverda, ill-fated Laverda Ghost, Lynx concept, the last, authentic Laverda, if you want to call it, concept had a Suzuki 1000cc engine in it. So this motor found many homes. And it was the versatility and quality in every sense. Auditory quality, literal quality, the quality, the power delivery that has so much character. I mean, when Italian companies, not one, but several, come knocking on your door saying, yeah, we want your motor in our exotic unobtainium road bike, you know the motor is special.
It must have been in a Bimota at some point.
It was. You're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
SB8 or something.
something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. SB9, one of them. You're right. And so there's, really that's the point. The V-Strom is a motorcycle made for regular people who want to do a lot of different things, from commute to get milk to maybe ride across the province or the state, go on a tour once in a while, you know, and yet still enjoy something. And the reality is that because the bike doesn't come with a, you said cult, but I don't think it's a cult bike in the way that a VMAX is, or in the way that you know, a, a, a Honda Goldwing is. Like, I doubt there are too many people who have tattooed the V-Strom logo on their bodies. But what I think I understood, what you alluded to, is that there's a loyalty. And let me paraphrase an advertisement campaign that Mercedes-Benz had a long time ago. People will be loyal to a vehicle when that vehicle is loyal to them. And, they were talking about Mercedes cars. The V-Strom is that Labrador dog. Um, it just does a lot of things. It's a great companion. It asks nothing in return. Why are we surprised that 23 years later, they're still churning this bike out? And myself, who you've known for a long time, I have very, let's call it, esoteric tastes in cars and motorcycles, and music. I like things that are a little different and that have strong character, like you. And I absolutely love the V-Strom. Uh, I did a long tour of Nova Scotia with Rob Harris and our editor, Zach, and the V-Strom was one of the bikes we had, along with the all singing, all dancing BMW GS, at the time 1250 GS, I guess, and a Multistrada, which perfunctorily broke down on a Sunday night in the middle of nowhere. Um, but the V-Strom was the bike that I liked. I more than liked, I really liked. I would have taken it home and I would have kept it.
You and I look for different things in motorcycles, I think because of your experience as working in the business and as a designer. Now, I just want a motorcycle to make my ass look good. But when you look at a bike, it's a totally different thing. So, I mean, the V-Strom is as we've established, it's got a fabulous engine, but the rest of it is built to a price. And, it doesn't take a lot of scrutinizing the components to realize that they are not top shelf. And yet it is one of those vehicles that seems to me to be above the sum of its parts. And I think you would agree to that. But in real terms, in terms of building a motorcycle, I mean, you've been there, you've made motorcycles at the companies you've worked for. How does the V-Strom do that? What does that mean more than the sum of its parts in real terms?
So Yamaha certainly didn't own the phrase, but they used it a lot when I worked at YMC. 1 + 1 = 3. And it was a philosophical approach. It was the idea that when you make a solution, a design solution, an engineering solution, that it's not about, like, I'm adding a feature. Here's a spec sheet. We need, I don't know, cargo mounting points for a bungee net, cargo net on the back of a motorcycle. Okay, it's on the spec sheet. That's the way a lot of companies I work for operate. The ones that are modeled in the US, the American model of R&D. A lot of the Indian companies work that way. A lot of Chinese companies work that way. Obviously, American ones. The Japanese approach, certainly Yamaha, because they're very, dare I say, a spiritual company, owing to the fact that they got their start as a musical instrument company, a century and a bit ago, and GK Design was founded by, a monks. That's true.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of Shinto.
And here I thought Kiska was a strange company.
Oh, GK is magnificent. That's a subject for another
another day.
But
so back to the you need a point to put your bungee cord on.
Right.
So
And
what
rather than just thinking, well, all right, tack weld on, some little loops into the rear subframe and we're done. Often Japanese manufacturers, and Suzuki does this, Honda does this in a very design forward way. Suzuki does it in a cost focused way. Um, Yamaha would do it in what one former product planning colleague of mine once said, eye tech, like eye is in the human eye. The Honda approach should be, we're gonna make the subframe out of some extremely beautiful forged aluminum piece, which only Honda could do at a profitable, profitably, that is both structure and integrates a loop that's cast in and is super styled and is wow. The Yamaha approach should be, hmm, let's make a second component. We'll use an inexpensive tubular subframe, but we'll make a casting, but it'll be very small. But it'll do something clever. It'll rotate outwards. It'll pop out or be spring loaded, or it's partially concealed by the styling. It'll be like really too clever by half. The
Mhm.
Suzuki approach will be, we've got a part here. Let's just put a hole in it. Because if we put a hole in it, there's a bungee hook point and it costs us negative money. Like it's like we've literally taken material away.
Couple of drill
Um,
bits.
yeah. Um, I'll give you a great example, and I don't know if this is true in the V-Strom case, but it absolutely is true in GSXR and Bandit. Again, Suzuki is a global automobile company. They manufacture millions of cars, low-cost cars for Southeast Asia, Japan, India. Um, they would use the injection mold cavity for a automobile dashboard. It's one of the largest tools in automobile production is the tool for making a dashboard, because the dashboard itself is quite big and you need, the tool for it has to be so much bigger and has sliding cavities and it's liquid cooled. It's very expensive. Like it can be a $15 million tool. These tools have cavities in them that are just solid metal because, the next shape of the, let's say in this case, a bumper or a dashboard.
Right.
They would sneak in motorcycle parts into the same cavity. So the front fender of a GSX-R came out of the same tool that was making a dashboard for the Suzuki Swift.
And it would happen at the same time that they were
The
doing the
same time, using the
Oh.
same ABS material. I mean, that's just really clever. And Yamaha can't do that. Yamaha doesn't produce at that volume. Much bigger volume motorcycle
Yeah,
company,
yeah.
but they make motorcycles, they don't make cars. They make car engines, but they don't make cars. And Kawasaki's whole attitude towards motorcycling is, oh, right, we in between the nuclear powered submarines and Boeing fuselage parts, it's like, oh, right, I forgot we
We
sometimes
make
make
motorcycles,
motorcycles.
yeah.
And Honda just does whatever it wants because it's God, in this industry.
Yeah.
So Suzuki's super clever, and I believe that when it came to these practicalities, the philosophy behind particularly bikes like the Bandit, which I think fits in the same mold, uh, no pun intended, as the
Mm.
V-Strom. I love the Bandit series, all of them, the 400 in particular, um, because they're just honest to goodness great motorcycles that do so many things well. And you started by saying, well, they build it down to a price. They do. They use the same suppliers, Kayaba forks and Showa suspension parts and Yuasa batteries, etc., right? The Japanese supply chain. They will ask for injection color instead of paint. They'll ask for the industrial grade gray for the fork tube instead of some pearlescent metallic that Honda or Yamaha or even Kawasaki would spec. They're cutting pennies. They're cutting 10 yen, which is, pennies off of every part, and that is just their philosophy. However, it's not just about thriftiness. There's a thriftiness and intelligence behind it as well. Like, why did they keep producing air oil cooled motorcycles? Because they could and because they worked great. And when an air oil cooled 1100 wasn't good enough in the horse to match the horsepower of a liquid cooled in Superbike, that meant that it still had 25 years left in it as a touring motorcycle engine.
They don't
where it
waste
was,
anything, do they?
which was under stressed and never going to overheat. And, it means now there's no water pump. Now there's no radiators. Now there's no thermostat. And you see how they go through every line in the bill of materials and they ask themselves at a systemic level, do we need this? And if we need it, can we combine it with another part? Everybody talks so much about Tesla because they make genuinely impressive cars, but they talk about this like innovation about like the best part is no part. They didn't invent this. This is a century old thinking. Old Henry Ford figured that out, that the floorboards of the Model T were made out of the wooden crate that some of the parts came in, and got reused. So Suzuki has applied that thinking to all their products. And the V-Strom at this point, the tooling is long since paid for itself. The chassis gets minor updates. Why would it need any? It's already more capable than the vast majority of motorcyclists. And in doing so, the V-Strom uh, caters to a big audience that is largely ignored by the mainstream manufacturers. They make super capable, 8/10 as good as the best, European legacy bikes. I The super bikes are phenomenal. I'd say they're 10/10 as good as anything, Ducati or BMW make for less money, that's more reliable, um, and is more, accessible. And what I mean is the performance envelope of these vehicles, on-road, off-road, sport, whatever, adventure, the way they deliver power, the way they brake, the way they handle, it's all tuned for the everyman. And, coming back to that loyalty thing, Suzuki riders can be very loyal because they feel like they're better than they probably are when they ride their Suzuki motorcycles. And isn't that the ultimate flattery, to get off your bike and think, "Man, that was just a great ride."
Michael, one of the things that you've talked about before is how enthusiast culture, and we are enthusiasts, and everyone listening or watching this is likely an enthusiast as well, but how we haven't necessarily served the business of motorcycling in the West very well by our over enthusiasm. And what does this mean when you talk about this kind of stuff?
So, as you said, we're enthusiasts. I am too. I have met so many incredibly passionate people at every company I've worked at. Engineers, planners, managers, parts guys at Japanese, Chinese, Asian firms, European firms. They're everywhere. And they're the lifeblood, right? Like we love what we do and it's terrific. However, a phenomenon that's particularly glaring in the, American market for all brands that operate in the US, which is still a very important market. It is the most, affluent motorcycle market in the world, is that we've let the lunatics run the asylum. And you could be talking about American Honda down in Los Angeles. We could be talking about Yamaha or Harley Davidson or anybody else. And KTM is perhaps the best example of this. We love the narrative, the idea of the passionate, the daring dreamers, bending the rules, betting it all on black, and then coming out winning. That's great. It's a great story. But what it's done is it's created this doom loop where project creep, driven by hardcore enthusiast culture, whether we're talking baggers in the Harley Indian mold or
Right.
motocross bikes, 250, 350cc motocross bikes, super bikes, all of it, where everything has to be extreme. Because anything that isn't at the absolute bleeding edge, cutting edge, whether it's features like TFT screens and ride modes, or if it's, a material obsession, oh, the latest thing is it needs a whatever titanium, whatever exhaust, is discounted. And the media are complicit in this. Motorcycle journalism, such as it is complicit in this. It creates this, and we see this unfortunately in politics. it creates an echo chamber that automatically excludes the people on the periphery who are the moto curious, the people who had a bike for a while and then stopped but still want to get back in. On a previous podcast, I said something that apparently upset a lot of people. I said that the American motorcycle dealership is a hostile environment. I don't mean that the dealers are hostile. I don't mean them as people. I mean, the dealer experience is a hostile environment to someone who's new to motorcycling or returning to motorcycling. They're big, huge, expensive showrooms. If you're unfamiliar with the jargon and the types and you don't know the difference between a saddlebag and a bagger, it's an intimidating environment. And there are some great people in sales and stuff, but even at the dealer level, the enthusiasts run the shop because they're these big multi-million dollar, floor plan dealers that we've talked about previously. And so they're all really big businesses. They're not the mom and pop where the guy can take an hour out of his afternoon and talk to a 22-year-old who's got the sparkle in their eye and maybe doesn't know much but just needs a little guidance, a little bit of like, it's okay. This is not, I'm not talking down to you because you might need to start on a 250 or a Honda CRF 300. Our culture, and unfortunately, ADV Riders sometimes does this. We talk down, people will say in some editorials, oh, the suspension on the Honda CRF 300 is crap. It is not crap. It is one of the best-selling motorcycles in the world. That's not an accident. It can handle anything from volcanic jungle roads in Indonesia to a highway in Houston. It's great for the 98% of people who are going to use it. But this is advrider.com, and everybody here is a self-professed inmate. And that's cool and it's fun and I like it. Let's not forget we all started somewhere. And that quote, pogo stick suspension is actually what a beginner or casual motorcyclist wants. Soak up that bump, give me a reassuring sense of isolation. And, the trouble with the particularly US market is it started off that the niche marketing was just that. Well, we've got some niches and we're going to make a lot of profit margin on that. And it got to the point where everything is a niche. We don't make bikes like the V-Strom nearly enough anymore.
Right.
And you started this by making the sort of funny but pejorative introduction to V-Strom. The fact is that
I stand by the fact that they do wear dirty white running shoes, though.
It is a thing.
It is a thing. I have the data to back it up.
Exactly. 20 years of
20 years of looking at old jeans and dirty running shoes to back up my claims.
Yeah, and a scratched up HJC helmet.
Yeah.
But that's the point. And what we've done is we've cut off our nose to spite our face. Everything is extreme. Everything is the most, the greatest, the fastest, the ready to racist. Whoops. The readiest to race. And then we shocked. Nobody was buying. Young people are not buying. Newcomers are not coming into dealerships. Well, no kidding. So, at the moment someone shows up at a dealership and shows an interest in a, $7,000 motorcycle, oftentimes they're talked into something because you're going to grow out of it.
You're going to grow. I was just about to say that. You're going to grow out of it.
Garbage idea that you're going to grow. You said that there's a guy inevitably at every racetrack and every summer track day that has a beaten up SV650. That's a 16-year-old 650 with its bodywork that's long gone and held together with duct tape and dreams. And it's still providing incredible enjoyment. Focused here on the key point. Is it winning the race? It's irrelevant. The guy riding it is having fun. That's why we're doing this, right? To have fun. The difference is that SV or V-Strom rider that we are making fun of is actually kind of superior being. They have reached a kind of, moment in their life where they don't care what you think about their bike. They're just out there having fun, and they're not spending a ton of money doing it. And boy, this industry sure could use a lot more of that. So
And their look in their faces that they've invested into their future better than I have, and they'd be right. But what you say about dealerships is totally true, and I didn't really think of it until a few years ago. I went and bought my first mountain bike, and I remember walking in, and I hadn't really thought about it, but I got really nervous because I really didn't know what I was looking for. And now I think of going into a multi-line dealership. There's one not a couple hours away from me that sells, I think, pretty much every brand short of Ural. And there are
yeah,
hundreds.
spare parts for those Urals are a bit
They're
hard to
everywhere.
get these
They're
days.
everywhere. Yeah. But I just remember thinking that, if you walked into that dealership with 4 or 5 European brands, a couple of Japanese brands, every bike wedged together,
Yeah.
where you and I and those people listening, we know the kind of mythic mind space between an MV Agusta Brutale naked and a Honda naked. We can kind of place them strategically in our mind, and we know that because it's 3 times the price, it's not 3 times the motorcycle, but if you want a certain thing, it's there. And I walked into that bicycle shop thinking, "Oh my God, I don't know that kind of the landscape of bicycles." And it's not just, it's brand, but it's also, how long is this going to last? And, metal, carbon versus aluminum. And so I did kind of the what you should do, but it felt humbling. I went in and I said, "This is how old I am. Here's where I'm going to be riding, and I have a bad back." And the guy looked at me and went, "Okay, you want suspension on the front and the rear." And then he led me over to modest, not inexpensive, but a good place that I would, and as a result, I'm never going to unless it snaps in two. I'm not going to upgrade because it's enough for me for what I do. And
Yeah.
and we could really use that more of that in motorcycling, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And it's fun that you mentioned bicycling. I started my career and my passion for inline two-wheel vehicles on bicycles. I mean, I guess we all did as children, but what I mean is as I mentioned in previous episodes, I raced road bicycles in Ontario in my teens and just up until I started university. Deep passion for cycling. Still have it. Bicycles have become fetish objects. Phones have become fetish objects. Cars are still commodities, but motorcycles in North America are fetish objects. And that's okay. I have a fetish for my Ducati. I know it's many faults, but it spins my crank. And I could get and I have had the privilege of owning and certainly trying, well, as you have for different reasons, lots of the best, newest, shiniest motorcycles of every variety. Which is why I can confidently say that the V-Strom 1000 is one of the best motorcycles I've ever ridden, unashamedly, without any reservation, without any caveats.
At any price.
At any price.
Yeah.
I will look, I bag on BMW a lot because it's fun. I admire the company. They make very decent products, and some of them are actually better than decent. Some of them are appallingly bad, like the BMW I rode in Italy last summer. Like just terrible for 2026. And it's brand and people care about brand. You care about BMW or KTM or Harley or whatever, knock yourself out. But here's the part I would love to end this on, because this is the part where the enthusiast conversation, the Vstrom conversation comes full circle. Everybody starts somewhere. Whether you're the most hardcore, ready to race guy, you remember the first time you rode a motorcycle and it was intimidating. You may not have admitted it at the time or to others, but it was intimidating because it is. Even if it's a 10 horsepower moped, you're like, oh my gosh. And it's fun memory now in retrospect. And now you're the hero that, confidently jumps sand dunes with your 1300 GS adventure. Good for you. But, to foster a healthier industry that sells enough vehicles, that keeps dealerships strong, your local motorcycle community growing. We need new people to come in, and we need people who are in to stay in as they change. You talked about your bicycle. I got a bad back, but I still want to ride. I'm this old, but I still want to ride. We need people to be able to go into motorcycle dealerships and say, I love motorcycling, but you know what? I can't bend over so well, and I can't hold up all this weight. We have a lot of great choice now, but the stigma still exists, and we see it on the boards, on the comments. You hear it in the dealers, you hear it at the shows. Oh, well, that's a beginner bike, or that's not good enough. Oh, enough of this. Pish posh. Like, ride what you love and recognize that the vast majority of 25-year-olds, people 25 years and younger, and I have the data. I do this for a living. They don't give a damn about brand. They don't know the difference between an MV Agusta and a Honda, and they never will, and they don't care. It's a different age. They want to see a product that looks cool, that's accessible financially, that's accessible in terms of use case. That means whatever it is they're doing, does the vehicle match their life? Not, I'm going to change my life and identity to match this branded, marketed image. That will continue, but it will continue to dwindle. This is why Harley Davidson is in trouble. This is why KTM went bankrupt. This is why, these are contributing factors to why, Polaris sold, Victory, or Indian, and closed Victory. You can't tie it all up in a bow with marketing polish and say, this is the product and this is you. You will be like these people on these ads, and you will act this way, dress this way, ride this way, be this way. That worked for a long time. That era is behind us. And around the world, that era never really happened. People went out and bought bikes because they wanted a motorcycle, and they walked to a dealer, and the dealer was friendly and made them a good deal, or made a good selection for them, and they chose it and it worked.
But that's a byproduct of societal affluence, isn't it? And as we get closer to the bone,
Yeah.
don't you think that goes away?
It's affluence, but it's also the age. Europe is affluent, despite what people who've probably never been there seem to think about Euro poor and all this. Germany, the Netherlands, France, Italy, these are affluent countries. These are G8 countries. These are high technology countries with superb industries, healthcare, and no, the dollar income isn't the same, but they also don't have to pay for their healthcare. So, end of the day, they're buying more motorcycles than America. They're buying 5 times as many motorcycles as the United States. So,
Right.
and they're buying expensive bikes, GS, R series, Honda Goldwings, but they also buy hundreds of thousands of Honda SH 150s, which, if you don't know what that is, well, that says it all. It's a scooter, and it does that job really, really well for $3,500. So I guess to close the discussion, Honda makes sells 1 in 3 new motorcycles around the world every year. They have a level of market capture equivalent to, Apple with the iPhone, like unassailable position. How did they get there? Is it the CBR? Is it the, crazy RC51, or something like a Goldwing? No. It was by making millions and millions of motorcycles that work really well, that are easy to live with, that are not scary. And then add to that, a really strong corporate culture that demands that dealers be like really middle of the road places, non-judgmental. Maybe that's actually the key. Young Gen Alphas all over the world, they are sick and tired of being told what to think.
Right.
And so the brands that are doing well by the young are the ones that are saying, here's this thing. What do you think? Do you like it? Cool. You don't like it? That's also fine. And not here is exactly how you must consume this motorcycle. So, V-Strom man with his, white sneakers is really just a reflection of that in older generations. A person who's like, I will not be told how to ride and what to ride. And as you said about your SV650, rival at the track, they're having a good time. So maybe there's something we could all learn from them.
Well, in the spirit of outlaws all over the world, and in the spirit of not telling people what to think, I think we should stop talking.
An excellent idea.
Thank you, Michael.
Always a pleasure.
Well, that's all, folks. Thank you for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show.